on the bell.
Okay.
Chairman, it's Emma Code. I can confirm that the live stream has now started.
All right, that's smashing. Thank you. Right, well, we'll kick off, everybody. Good morning, officially good morning all. We're still waiting for Mark Goodwin to join, so we'll look out for him and as and when he appears. Hopefully, this is the end of these horrible virtual meetings, or getting towards the end of these horrible virtual meetings. So, yeah, if we can put through to, we have got some private parts of the meeting, so we will try to break after the main part of the meeting, because there are some things which we need to discuss privately. And clearly, it's a time of a lot of things happening all at once at the moment, particularly around G7 and stuff. So there might be one or two things which we've got to be a little bit careful of, which aren't yet confirmed or in the process of being worked through. So if people could just keep that in mind. So we've had apologies from Tim today, and very last minute with Frances, who may not appear. She's in the middle of a big bid and talking to government about it. So Frances may appear, and we've had apologies from Paul and Phil and John Kerner, but I have had a lengthy email from John, who's clearly gone through all parts of the board pack, which I have updated him on. So I'll feed back to him, and we had a conversation with him, a helpful one, about some work that Claire is leading on the arms transition. And I just want to, I know we sent a note out, just want to thank Emmy publicly for the huge mountain of work that she's done on behalf of the LEP, both in the board and outside of the board, representing Cornwall, obviously often representing the LEP in all sorts of forums, as well as her sector. So your effort, your intelligence, your challenge will be hugely missed, Emmy, and we wish you all the best. And it's fitting we have a piece from you on the creative sector a little later on. So thank you for everybody. I don't know if are there any declarations of interest that we need to note at this stage? We have got one or two items for decision, but I'm not sure there's anything over and above. So
I think, Mark, just be in relation to the WAVE project, anything that comes up in relation to the WAVE project.
Yeah, sorry, Emmy. Okay, thank you. So now my other screen has gone blank, so if we can just go through the minutes, and I think what we'll need to do is if we can go through them for accuracy, and then we'll formally, as it's a sort of formal meeting, we'll formally sign those off. So if we go through accuracy, I'll get Nathan to update on the actions resulting, and then we'll sign them off if we're happy they are what we all recall the meeting to be. So I think it's page 3 of the pack, so please yell if there's anything that that you want to correct or amend. Page 4. No, page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. And Carol, page 9. And page 10. We will probably pick up on the free put, but I think that's something we probably would reserve to the private if there's any other comments on that, because there's a bit of work happening on that. And page 11. I just want to say thank you in that we've done a lot of work through Steve and Carol with bringing representatives from the fishing industry closer to us, and we're working proactively with them on their strategy in many regards, or trying to. So thank you people for their hard work for that action. And page 12. So I think they're accurate. So Nathan, do you want to just fly through the actions and make any comments on those?
Yeah, there's 4 actions there, and the first 3 were action directly after the November board meeting, and the 4th action, Mark just mentioned, around the fishing sector, That one was added to the LEP board forward plan, and we'll have a formal item at the July board on that one, building on the various conversations ongoing with industry partners across a number of LEP director portfolios. So there's plenty going on there.
Chair, it's Emma Code. On the minutes, sorry, just to go back, could I ask that I have a show of hands from everybody that they're happy that they are a correct record?
Yeah, so hands up. Yeah.
Okay, that's great, thank you. They've been carried as a correct record.
That's smashing. Okay, and if Linda and Fran are struggling with the, I know they've got hands up, haven't you? Just Fran, we need to.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Lovely. All right, well, thank you very much for that. And the party, as a sort of a plug for the LEPs on the fishing side of it, I think that is a really good piece of work about how LEPs can start to convene what is a really disparate and a little bit removed sector that and try to bring them together enough that we will be putting a little bit of money towards helping them develop their strategy, which will be around market making, port side, energy, clean transition, you name it. So we're trying to help frame the piece of work for them, and but again, ultimately it's something they need to own. So thank you everybody for that. On the chair's update, there's just a few things I just wanted to say, if people can indulge me for a little while, and then before we pass on to Nathan to pick up. I think it's really good to start to see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of reopening, and you can sort of set a palpable sense of change at the moment. But there's sort of three things I think which are which I keep coming back to all the time that are really key to us at the moment. One is when we're talking to all the businesses and business sectors, and and we've got Emmy talking about creative sector today. We've got to keep our feet on the ground with where we are at the moment. There does appear that there will be a lag between the reopening of our traditional business and the return to the employment levels we had before, let alone the delivery of earnings and productivity levels that we've been looking to address for many years now. So I think the amount of people on furlough, the amount of people on universal credit now, the amount of people actively looking for employment are quite depressing figures. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second emerging thing is it does feel very different now, is that some of the emerging sectors that we worked on with the local industrial strategy now really feel like they're getting proper traction. And that's my mum ringing up to tell me that she disagrees with that first point. She lives in Suffolk and she really doesn't understand Cornwall. So, but the second thing is that the areas which we identified in many of the areas we identified in our local industrial strategy appear now to be getting some real attraction and attention both nationally, and we hope through G7. One of the reasons we wanted Glenn to lead on the economic legacy side of it is to make sure that we get that word out internationally that these are sectors into which private monies should and hopefully will will follow with investment. And the more we get to know and talk to businesses in these sectors, you can sort of feel and touch and smell the tangible difference that they will make in the medium term to our economy and to issues such as the environment and climate, which is all encouraging. But both those things are happening at a time when, yet again, LEPs are subject to another review from MHCLG, which is being described as an evolution towards a new organisation with probably new responsibilities. We've already seen the Levelling Up Fund, Community Recovery Fund, transition to being run by the local authorities with MP sponsorship, ultimately signed off by the Minister, somewhat like town deals. So it feels like a period of change. And there's also quite a bit of suggestion in the review and in conversations around FE of more steps towards centralisation of decision making, and areas of work for us that we've been looking at for many years now around devolution or ring fence monies and pilots are getting quite difficult. So the timing of this review has just about started. I think the terms of reference are now, I think, agreed. We think it's going to be Paul Scully who will be the lead minister. I'm not sure that's been officially confirmed as yet. And the suggestion is that there will be this evolution will culminate in a paper recommendation to the Minister ahead of the summer recess, and funding for LEPs in that new form to be then confirmed in the autumn statement. And I think we just got to recognise this is going to cause a lot of uncertainty to our executive team, but also in our recruitment of future NEDs. So the nominations committee, I think we're going to have a tough time. But I think it's directionally quite bad news for Cornwall and cities, where the work we've done around strategic development investment has been built around partnership between private money and local and national government and education bodies. Hopefully today you'll agree that the investments we have made as a team have been very effectively managed in a very, very dynamic environment, and will and have made a difference. And as I said before, we're getting real traction now with our energy agenda, space, digital, but also rethinking of many of our traditional bedrock industries. All of those, I think, built on partnership. The other reason I am worried that this review will be bad for Cornwall is the degree of economic dislocation that we have and are suffering. We have record numbers on furlough. We have record numbers on universal credit, and the numbers actively seeking employment are creeping ever up. We know the hotspots of deprivation in terms of place and demographics. We know some of the communities that have been really hard hit, and we know there's a big need to reskill our workforce, particularly digitally and technically. And Emmy will talk about her sector later on and the sort of devastating impact that COVID's had on that. But it's also clear from our weekly call with businesses and business groups that business confidence, despite the busy summer and despite the huge opportunity of the G7, does remain generally weak. And there's very little indication of the conversations and surveys that's happening with business of a huge bounce back in terms of employment and investment. And there is a tangible nervousness of many companies still about the repayment of loans, despite the excellent support from government in most sectors. And Amy will have some comments to talk about the creative sector, and we still know that there are many in self-employed that haven't seen a boom in their working, for most of us working in a home and in fact in sort of stasis. So it is really important for Cornwall that the promises made about the quantum support for Cornwall going forward, however they're delivered, are honoured from next year. And we can try and make sure they're deployed coherently against the local industrial strategy or versions of it, which has been adopted by all organisations readily within Cornwall. So a piece of work we should be proud of, and Mark in particular for leading. So that's McGloon. There are really many reasons I still think to be optimistic about the medium and longer term, as our core opportunities align with every definition of success that we can see that what needs to happen in the 21st century. We do absolutely align to the government's clean growth agenda. And we can see that there are opportunities that we really hope will attract private monies, this quantum of which could be vastly more than we would hope to receive from government, not decrying the huge importance of the latter. So even in this week, recently we've seen Benjamin, a company we've talked about a lot, have now received significant investment from an industry leader supplying agriculture, which there's a risk associated with that, but we really hope this will accelerate their growth, already now located on our enterprise zone. Steve might talk a little bit about the major interest in the major oil companies, investment bodies looking at with real intent now to build out floating offshore wind and the implications that will have in the Celtic Sea. Glenn and I have had a number of conversations with British Lithium and Cornish Lithium to try to understand where they are. We know that there are globally significant levels of lithium beneath our feet and in the waters beneath our feet. And that could in turn lead to a significant supply chain for processing lithium, even before we get to the ambition of having a gigafactory in there, and the quantum investment to make that happen is in the many hundreds of millions of pounds of private money. I talked before about Virgin improving their technology and the importance and the interest that has sparked in Newquay and Goonhilly. And we now know that our deepest hole in Europe is now supplying energy, will be shortly supplying energy with plans for the heat. And again, that's galvanised a real interest in the opportunities for geothermal. So I think probably many of us on the call have probably had more conversations with businesses and investors looking at Cornwall than maybe cumulatively in the last 5-6 years put together, which is really encouraging. Some of those are some way off realisation, and many of which you can almost sort of taste it and feel it. So all of that, I hope, will be given a huge boost by the arrival of G7. And thank you again for anybody that's been involved in helping make that decision and deliver it. So we have seconded Glenn to lead against the economic legacy, because we were concerned that even with having Josie Goff as our lead within Cabinet Office, that we had to do an awful lot really quickly. I think compared to previous G7s who had years in building this, we had months, if that, and it's a really dynamic situation at the moment. So Glenn will be joining us later on for our private session. He's in the G7 meeting now, and can update us a little bit more openly on how he sees the G7 legacy rolling out. We have seen some successes already, which are really important. We will be a lead area for the gigabit rollout, which will underpin so much of our businesses and in some of our more difficult areas in Cornwall. We've seen investment come into our cultural sector, and we've also seen confirmation of monies to be spent at the airport, which are vital for the G7 arrivals, but actually underpin the space and aerospace development in the medium term. So all good stuff, but we need to make sure that the town deals get delivered, and some really good stuff happening in all of those, but a lot of real key challenges now. It is separate to the floating offshore wind is a separate process to the G7, but we want to make sure that we maximise pull every lever we can to influence that decision positively, and Steve will update on that. And we're also setting up, we've got a media plan which Katie Popper, you and Gordon are involved with, and we're setting up what's been called Cornwall House, which is in the University of Falmouth facility in the centre of Falmouth, which will be the place where we will receive not just media delegations, but hopefully trade delegates, ambassadors, you name it. And the object of that is to sell Cornwall as an opportunity for inward investment, particularly of private monies. So a lot of good stuff happening, and Glenn will join us a little later on. So all that is really very good and hugely exciting and hugely valuable. But I still hope that despite that, I still fear that despite that, and the fact that we'll probably be inundated with visitors this year, that we need to, as a team, keep our feet on the floor, because jobs, earnings, costs are still going to be very difficult. The summer will have more people at an industry and still probably not able to operate at full capacity. So we know there's a lot of money to be repaid, let alone in a position where businesses can invest. And we know from conversations with too many people that that there's a nervousness about investing in people in terms of future employment and such like. I am nervous of the LEP review, and I am worried that the LEP review might make it harder for us to work in partnership with key partners around Cornwall, both in the private sector and public sector. I hope I'm wrong, but I am worried about that. And I'm also want to make sure that the framework for us basing our decisions and work around our local industrial strategy is understood. That's a good piece of work, relevant for the recovery with the amendments that are being made. But how will that sit alongside the new look at national industrial strategies and building back better work that the government's doing? We've also done really, really good stuff in terms of skills agenda with our Employment Skills Board, but off the record, working with HE and FE partners, working with delivery agents and schools to make sure that we're aligning supply against future demand, and we're trying very hard to then influence the demand by talking to young people. So again, the changes with FE, I really hope build on what we've done rather than get us where we've got to start again. So that's where I think we are. There's some really good stuff and there's some worrying stuff. So from my point of view, again, thank everybody in this horrible virtual world, the exec and board that have done a huge amount of work outside of this formal board meeting. Often, such as the fishing is a good example, pulling together disparate groups who are somewhat removed from the rest of the economic base here, and so many instances of that where people on this call or listening into this call have done really, really well. That involves working closely with people like Local Nature Partnership and others. So thank you for all that work. Just one final thing for me before I take questions, and Linda wants to come in. There are a couple of emails which Debbie has sent on to everybody as part of the LEP review. I have been rather loud when I'm talking to sort of, I sit on the LEP National Board, or Chairs Board, and I've been very loud about the strength of parts of our executive team and non-execs, and how we've got people on our team that can talk to the LEP review, particularly from the point of view of a rural area, such as ours, with the partnerships we have got. So if you want to, or feel you've got time to, talk to the to LEP Network about that, please, follow the link through. They might say, I've heard about you, because that's me. So, but don't feel under any pressure whatsoever to do that. But I think we have a particularly, LEPs are very different up and down the country, and ours is not a unique setup, but it's a particular setup which I think works very well for our rural area. And I'd like very much to make sure that voice is heard. So if you have got time to support, please do, but don't feel any obligation to do so, because I'm very well aware of the amount of work that people have done. So that's very much my thoughts. A couple of people wanted to come in, so I'm not sure I've got the order right, but Linda?
Thank you, Mark, for a really comprehensive report. There would be a lot I would like to say, but I must respect PERDA in this particular arena. So it's not that I don't want to say anything, but I am respecting PERDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and I appreciate it. Those very much. I am taking that. They are my thoughts as chair, and I do appreciate that the situation at the moment is extraordinarily dynamic. But thank you for respecting that. Any other thoughts? Sorry, I'm multitasking, which is dreadful. No. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for. I think Mark's now joined the call, so welcome, Mark. And as I say, thank you. Don't if you can look out for those surveys that have come through from Debbie, and if you are able to help, please do. Nathan.
I think Mark Goodwin might have his hand up.
It was just to say, Mark, that I've just put that link in the chat to the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and I think our list speaks really well to that. So yeah, I think we just need to be agile around this and make sure that we align ourselves to the government's new kind of direction. But I think the list does help us do that. So I don't think we have to change direction, but I think we have to keep on hammering home to the government that we are delivering what they want us to deliver through that list.
Yeah, I tend to share that view. I think, as I said, in the medium term, I think we're absolutely aligned to where the government wants to take. I think the LIS has been very well accepted and underpins a lot of conversation, not that just that we have, but other people have too. And I know that parts of it, particularly in our traditional areas, are being worked on by colleagues. So what does it really mean coming out of the COVID? Food, drink, fishing, maybe we'll talk about creative. So we know there's gaps, but I think the basis of it is spot on. And we'll have Malcolm talking about the work being done on tourism, a little later on. I think hopefully as we come through these elections, increasing clarity about the how those documents will be used and tying to each other. But thanks Mark, and apologies for missing the hand. I think there's nobody else. I can't see anything else flashing at me, so I think Nathan, it's over to you.
Great, thank you Mark, and I'll try not to repeat too much or anything of your update as I highlight aspects of the CEO report, starting with governance. So on the 4th of February, we held our annual LEP annual performance review with Government, City and Local Growth Unit. The formal outcome is yet to be confirmed, but it was a positive meeting, and it identified completion of all the actions from our mid-year review, highlighting good coverage across all performance areas, with governance examples including us surpassing the national board diversity targets, and on delivery highlighting performance of the Growth Hub and the management of growth deal delivery in these final stages. And on strategic intent, examples included the use of our LIS, our local industrial strategy, as part of the framework for getting building fund decision making, and the convening role of the LEP-led economic recovery group in response to the pandemic. Some actions being taken forward into next year include commitment to joint working on G7 and continued dialogue on our planning around board succession and recruitment. So also on governance, we've been preparing for this year's delayed peer review session. It's tomorrow. This time we've been paired with the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership, and the focus, as well as being on performance and process, will cover scrutiny over our economic recovery responses, and we'll report back on the conclusions of the review. Moving on to policy and strategy, and building on what Mark has already said, the last month has seen some emerging clarity over the local authority lead role for the new Levelling Up Fund and the SPF pilot programme, the Community Renewal Fund. We've seen the disbanding of the National Industrial Strategy Council and the emergence of the Build Back Better Business Council and a new government plan for growth. For the 4 town deals, all with LEP director representation, we saw the submission of their town investment plans at the end of January, with work now focused on being ready to deliver at pace if successful, with the funding outcomes expected in May. We've also been working closely with the Local Nature Partnership, considering a number of initiatives covering low carbon transition, whole farm business support, and a potential new town greening programme. And this work has been formalised through a joint LNP-LEP working group, and we'll provide updates on the work at future meetings. Regarding G7, lots been covered by Mark. I would only add that in the CEO report, we set out some of the detail of the work underway, with a focus on that economic legacy potential as an opportunity to showcase regional business and investment opportunities aligned to the local industrial strategy, as well as those infrastructure improvements, both physical and digital. The team are working with local partners on joint communication campaigns, the Business Expo, and the development of a programme of legacy projects. So just moving on to delivery, a lot will be picked up in the enterprise zone and the investment and oversight items later, with particular consideration of where we are in the final stage of the 7-year, £78 million growth deal programme. I just wanted to pick up briefly on 2 other delivery areas to note. Firstly, the Growth Hub, as our gateway to publicly funded business support, it saw a significant ramp up of activity over the year and in recent months, providing triage to businesses through additional advisor capacity and delivery across a variety of government programming, including deployment of £1.4 million of Kickstart grants, and leading a programme of business outreach on EU transition in conjunction with Cornwall Council's Business and Regulatory Service and the Chamber of Commerce. And secondly, through our newly reformed Employment and Skills Board and our Digital Skills Partnership, we saw the Kit for Kids crowdfunder appeal in February, which raised £76,000 to deploy additional digital kit for school children. And just this week, we saw the publication of our new local skills report and labour market analysis. And finally, just a quick highlight on risks. You'll see in the report, as previously, we continue to highlight 2 red risks, one around the pandemic and recovery, and the other in respect to government policy, which remains red in the context of the upcoming LEP review. The other risks will remain amber, but with risk B around resources increasing due to the secondment of the chief exec to G7, and also risk G on communications, and that's increasing due to the reputational risks around G7 and legacy, with the mitigation of this risk centered around the secondment of the chief exec. So that was all I was going to pick up from the report, Mark. I can come back to you.
Just to thank you, Nathan. Just on the growth hub, I just want to sort of say to you and Louis, the growth hub's in a very different place now, and I think it's in terms of its reach. I think there's a very sensible relationship between that and the representative groups as well that work together clearly hand in hand. So through our Monday call and the work those groups do and the growth hub, we are probably able to access and listen to and get noises from hundreds of businesses, which is helpful. But the growth hub certainly has done a very sound job in very difficult circumstances and at pace. So thank you, you and Louis, for doing that. Comments and questions on the report? David.
Thanks, sir. It's just at 3.2, page 17 at the end there, and it goes back to your introductory remarks, Chair, on the LEP review. Do we understand what the consideration of local enterprise partnership geographies actually alludes to? Maybe there's not a short answer, but are they talking about fewer, larger? Is that the thrust of that?
Yeah, it's work in progress. I don't think there's certainly in the past been talk about the 38 LEPs, used to be 39, coming down to something like 30 or even 20. I think the latest conversations with LEP Network and the civil servants leading it is those are sort of softening. I think from our I honestly don't know where that leaves us. I think there are issues up and down the country in terms of overlap still. So some of the stuff from the first LEP review I don't think was satisfactorily resolved from government's point of view. I don't know. I do have a nagging fear that if we become any bigger, and certainly we're seeing a little bit in the Great Southwest Western Gateway conversations, that push towards sort of bigger groupings of and that one is nonsensical because it's trying to put in together two very different economic entities that don't actually want to work with each other in a horrendously difficult political environment. So the answer to your question is I don't know, David. We will know by the early summer. I think there will be undoubtedly a rationalisation of it, but whether we will be part of that, we just might end up with a very small LEP because we are very distinctive. And our governance, we've just been at our last review. I think it is proved to be to be effective. So yeah, as and when we hear, I will let people know. But there's a 10 to fewer and bigger.
Okay. In terms, just very briefly on that, in terms of inputting to the review, and the LEP network, try and do that. I mean, you recall that there was a move to have fewer, larger, more resilient colleges a while back. Well, they're fewer, they're larger, they're not more resilient, and they wish they hadn't done it. So I'll try and make that point in my contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. I've always got to go because my professional career has always been predominantly in two very large organisations with a very devolved, very autonomous group of businesses operate, and it works because of focus and pace and relationships. On paper it might not look sensible, but it works, and we're seeing a bit of that. So we will do, and that LEP review, those conversations are also being held clearly with political parties, but also with chambers, FSB, representative groups, local authorities. And there has been some kickback from some of the local authorities who value the work that LEPs have done in terms of the strategic sifting and alignment of things to strategy and delivery, and some of them are quite nervous. So it is a very floating, and every time we have the calls, you feel that the book has moved on a few chapters, but I think at the end of the day, I'm a little bit concerned. It should come to a head ahead of the summer recess. Well, that started the meeting off on a positive note, looking at everybody's faces. Any other comments or questions about? We've skated through a lot of work streams in that, and thoughts on risk. And with Glenn being seconded, you're very well aware that the pressure on Nathan and the team is built. So I know colleagues have been working hard to support. Okay. Brilliant, excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Nathan, thank you, team. So, Emmy, can we pass over to you to, and you and Nathan maybe to lead on the creative update?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Mark. Well, despite the trailer and in a shocking and probably welcome development, I don't actually have a huge amount to say. Because I think most of it is spelt out in the report, but I'll just draw people's attention to a kind of few highlights, and it does kind of translate quite well to what Mark was saying about kind of mixed picture. So on the one hand, members can refer to the subsectors that are listed at the beginning of the creative report update. We've got really quite devastating impacts in terms of the effect of coronavirus on the creative industries subsectors, but in particular to anybody associated with live performance and the performing arts, which is not going to be a surprise to any of us. And a couple of examples of that might be some of you might have seen. And opera singer, internationally renowned opera singer, who had 2 years worth of bookings cancelled overnight, and nothing has come back to replace that. And then another circus company based in Cornwall who work internationally at lots of big kind of celebration government events, particularly in the Middle East, lost all of their work overnight, and again nothing coming back to fill that space. And the particular issue that you can see in the update from the Creative Industries Federation, which is shortly to merge with Creative England as the kind of sector body, and we have very good connectivity with them via the LEP in Cornwall. It is that actually, the freelancers who are outside of London are the ones that have been most affected. And that's really important to note for Cornwall, because as we know, we've got a higher rate of self-employment in Cornwall anyway. And then that's kind of magnified as a trait of the creative industries subsectors. So the shock is, is quite profound. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I've drawn your attention to some really interesting research from in a report called Creative Radar. And if you have got to the time to flick to the end of that report, there's some maps that are very easy to understand, which demonstrate what we've been saying for the last 6 years, which is that Cornwall is the leading creative rural region. Because the density in all subsectors of the creative industries in comparison to other rural regions is really apparent when you look at those maps. So I would draw your attention to looking at those. So there's something really important in the structure of our economy, despite this shock, that we need to keep thinking about. And I would urge you all to just kind of keep that in the front of mind as you're developing and responding to new strategies from government. I wanted to say something in particular about cultural organisations. So Cultural Recovery Fund has been an absolute lifeline, and we have had a good level of investment in cultural organisations across the piece in Cornwall, although the last round of that was announced yesterday, and I think, as I've trailed in the report, it was very heavily oversubscribed, and I spoke to 3 people yesterday, none of whom had got anything. So I think we expect it's going to be more difficult in this round of investment. I suppose there's just a bit of kind of human stuff that I wanted to add to that, which I'm sure those of you working in other sectors will recognise, and it's probably not just specific to the cultural sector, but the kind of process of the last 12 months of getting ready to open, then cancel stuff, replanning, planning. We're now at a phase where people, so in my sector, museums and galleries are planning, and the government's roadmap to reopen on the 17th of May. They are tired, and the health and well-being of teams is a real issue for chief executives in cultural organisations. I'm sure other people would say the same in other areas of business. But the reason why I wanted to draw our attention to that is because with these new funds, for example, the Community Renewal Fund, which we only found out about 2 weeks ago, and the deadline for that is the 7th of May, and we've never encountered anything like it before, that is being made available to a sector that is really not functioning at full capacity. And so I think the LEP and our partners in Cornwall Council have got a real opportunity to try and support our cultural sector organisations to make the most of those opportunities, because actually culture and creativity are going to be key to high street renewal and addressing the decline of retail and getting people to come back into town and city centres. They're going to be key to the health and well-being challenges that we face. They're going to be absolutely key to sustainable tourism. So it's really not assuming that there's capacity there, because these are usually very small organisations working with an ecosystem of freelancers, and we need to do our best to make sure that they can. There are definitely opportunities, and we need to do our best to make sure they can access them. And then in terms of the things that the Creative Industries Task Force is doing, and I'm really pleased that we set that group up, because I think it's really active and effective now. It's really found its feet. With me stepping down, there was still unanimous view from all of the people at that group that they wanted the group to continue. And you'll note that someone called Mandy Berry, who's excellent, has stepped in to be volunteer chair of that group in the interim period. I think, we need, because we've got such a diverse and dispersed sector that's characterised by freelancers and micros, we need to really keep working on industry engagement and trying to find ways to connect with businesses to understand what they need. And that's why I'm really pleased to say that the LEP is going to be supporting the development of a creative network, particularly focusing on supporting those freelancers. So that's really good news. Really good news that work is being done, which you'll have seen in the CEO's report, to update the evidence base. Because the LEP was the last organisation to invest in that, and that was a while ago. And this sector is very fluid and changing, and lots of digital businesses. So we really need to understand better what's going on, and that hopefully will help inform you as you develop your new strategies. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. We're going to come back to G7. I've got some stuff to say on that later. And then I just wanted to say thank you to all of the LEP team and all of the NEDs and the exec team. It's been great for me being part of this team. I've learned so much from loads of inspiring people, and you can count on my support as I step down. I continue to be an avid supporter of the work you're doing. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Emmy, again. I've got a couple of questions, but I shall go to the Gordon. Do you want to come in first?
Yeah, if I may. I think this is a terrific piece of work, and it's great that Emmy picked up on the Cultural Renewal Fund, and Emmy makes a really good point about how knackered people in the sector are and lacking in resource to get stuck into that. Something I'm seeing in the cultural sector in London is and I'm sure it's true in Cornwall as well, is that it's not only that people are exhausted with the effort, it's that they've gone through they've burned through their reserves, and if they're still in business, they're clinging on, and it just takes one more thing. Some of the London boroughs, I'm doing some work with Newham at the moment, they're effectively nursing people through applications to the Cultural Renewal Fund, because none of us have a clue how to do it. And I think if we can help with that, it would make quite a difference to organisations which I suspect otherwise simply won't have the resource to step in and try. And there's £220 million to play for, so it is it's worth the game.
No, Nathan, can I be a bit unfair and just pass over to you on comments on that? And the other question I had, Emmy, is and it might be one for Mandy. Every Monday we meet with all the other representative groups, and it's an hour meeting, and we talk about what's happening, opportunities for support, details, and such like. It might be worth Mandy or someone. It's more difficult because the other Green Network or manufacturing group have a bit more coherence, but it might be that there might be some support coming from that as well. So if Mandy or whoever's the best person to do it, I think it'd be useful to join. Nathan, do you want to the Cultural Renewal Fund at all?
Yeah, so well, Emily and I had a previous conversation about looking at some of the opportunities that are being made available now through the latest kind of round of government funding opportunities, and we can pick up on that one specifically going forward. And just regarding the other points and the recommendations in the report, as Emily alluded to, we have tried to build into next year's delivery plan some of those. There's coverage across all of those recommendations in the report, specifically around data development, around data, around the talent pipeline work that's going on with the Employment and Skills Board later, I think in June, and obviously the industry engagement activities around the creation of a creative network that's already kicked off this year, and there'll be some more development activity around that in the next financial year.
And just a general question: if, as and when the gigabit investment comes, I'm just thinking what's the mechanism of that sector tagging into that investment? I don't know how that would work. I know it's the same as every sector, but given the Emmy's description of it, how do we make sure that if there is going to be the world's fastest fibre, we connect it to the world's most creative people? So I think, how do we do that?
Indeed, I think that one is quite a tricky one to answer in terms of the rollout of these the newest kind of technologies, whether that's 4G and or 5G and other technology. It's currently really around the commercial viability of those rollouts that drive where and when and how the kind of installation happens. So it's and largely we're seeing across the country, the commercial deployment is focused around rural, urban, populous kind of locations, and looking at some of the different government kind of programs around outside in and shared rural networks and things like that. We just need to be able to capitalise on any of those kind of programs that are beginning to roll out now.
I think, can I come in there, Mark, on that point? I think that's why you've got the Creative Industries Task Force there. There will be hopefully some new members joining that will particularly strengthen around digital. So I think that is an important industry group to make the most of. I think I would just draw attention to this issue of scale, where you've got Cornwall Council is a big beast. We've got other large agencies that we work with. Actually, when we're trying to do some of this stuff around the fund that you've just described, it's really small, innovative, quite often quite new companies that we want to be engaging with, because they're the ones who can test stuff out in an agile way. And we've been doing that in the WAVE project with 5 different tech companies, doing some really interesting things. But it's required us to understand how to communicate with a small business, a small digital business, and have good networks. And encourage them and make them, really go to them and sell the opportunity. And so I think there's a bit of, kind of not just sharing the guidance and then expecting people to flood in and come and, there is talent out there. There are people who really are ambitious about what Cornwall can contribute and are already doing interesting things, but you have to be on the front foot and go and find them and kind of bolt these opportunities together, because again, it's really difficult for small businesses to engage with big multi-million funding programs, is what I would say. So let's make the most of our existing infrastructure and things like immersive business that we've got that's about to launch at Falmouth University. My understanding of that is that it's a private sector facing facility that, public money has been invested in that. How can we make the most of that to connect with these businesses that we want to support and test out innovative practice with this infrastructure investment that Nathan's describing. So it's joining the dots, isn't it? I think is what I'm saying.
I think that's a really fair point. I think we need to take that up as an action between Nathan and Glenn and myself. I saw it in the it's a shame Francis isn't on the call. Some of the press that accompanied that announcement talking about South East Cornwall actually mentioned Callington, which sort of prompted that, you know, how the hell do we join the dots between that, you know, in a really quiet area of Cornwall for this industry. The other thing, I know it's not on the scale of the huge stuff that we talked about, Emmy. There's also a group of people working around the details, and Malcolm's one of them, but of reopening safely for all these sectors as well. And again, it might be worth, and it's looking at some of the grey areas and yet to be decided areas, just to make sure. So it's a bit more on the nitty gritty of what happens rather than the economic part of what happens. But again, it would be useful. I think Richard Wilcox and the bid team's there, but it'd be useful maybe for Mandy or somebody from the industry to be in that, because it's starting to look forward to events and the capacity issues that might hit us in the summer and those sort of things. Any other questions or comments off? Anyway, very welcome. If somebody wants to do that, let me know and I'll make sure that
okay.
It's a helpful meeting, but it's not going to solve the economic issue, but it will be.
I think there is a thing there, Mark, about connectivity with DCMS, Department for Culture, Media and Sport. They are testing out in certain locations approaches to live events, and it's making sure that there's somebody from Cornwall in those conversations. So again, you and I can pick that up.
Yeah, and we were hoping to carve out locally a pot of money to help live events do it, but I think that I can't see there's going to be any money left in any pots to do that. But if we can pick that up, that's an action definitely. Any other comments or questions for Emmy from the paper? And I would, if you get a chance, to click on the I can't remember what it's called now, Emmy, Creative Radar. Those maps are quite telling. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I've got my other half is actually working in a business today, and she's left 3 dogs which have now decided they're going to start to howl. So anything else from? No. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you, Emmy.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry, it's Carol. Just before we move on, can we do the recommendations, please?
Yeah, sorry, we do need to do that. Thank you, Carol. I was getting ahead of myself. Dogs, you see. Right, so if you see that take notes of the recommendation of the board, take notes of those comments, and there are some action points arising from that, which we'll clearly articulate in a minute. But are people happy to support? So if you can just put a little hands up if we are, that'd be great.
I'm happy too, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're talking to the islands about this as well.
Thank you. I can confirm that the recommendation has been carried.
Lovely, thank you. I've now got bloody cats after me as well. This is ridiculous. Right. If we go into the nominations, I know Gordon had put a question from the previous section in the chat box, but I think we'll cover that in the delivery plan and budget in a second. But if I can just take people to the nominations paper, and I can't remember what paper, page 64. So we have a number of recommendations there, and I know a number of us had conversations about which I probably just undermined in my conversation about LEP review, but the about renewing their terms. So there's, I think, 8 recommendations, but the first 5 I think we need to go through individually. So I appreciate some people on the call now. So that's looking at Francis, Steve, Gordon, David's and Lisa's positions on the board. So if I can, is there any other? Sorry, before we do that, is there any comments? I'm assuming people have read the papers. There's nothing coming from those papers, but is there anything on the paper we need to pick up? No one's shouting. Okay, smashing. Okay, thank you. So I think formally we just need to approve. So if we can do these one by one, and if we can put the hands up again. So if we can do number one, which is just renewing the proposal to renew Francis's position as director for next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I can confirm that the first recommendation has been carried.
Lovely, thank you. And so we do the same again for Steve, please. Pop your hand up or leave it up.
Thank you. The second recommendation has also been carried.
Marvellous, thank you. And Gordon?
Thank you. The third recommendation has been carried as well.
Great, thank you very much. And David?
Thank you. The fourth recommendation has also been carried.
Smashing, thank you very much. And the last one, which is on the individual, is the Lisa's proves that Lisa is a member of the company, and it takes from a few weeks ago, but we can take a vote.
Thank you. I can confirm recommendation 5 has also been carried.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then there's conversations we've had about some individual changes. So we've asked Francis to become a member of our nominations committee. John is joining the LEP Audit and Assurance Committee, and David Warland is to join the LEP Investment and Oversight Committee. So again, if we take those collectively, I know the individuals are happy to do that, so I'm not lumping anything on them. Thank you.
Thank you. I can confirm recommendations 6 to 8 have also been carried.
That's smashing. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. And I think the only thing I would make with the nominations committee is, as we understand more of the detail of the LEP review, because clearly we might be asking people to join the team, and we need a bit more clarity about that, so we can describe what it is that we're being asked to do. So there might be that the LEP nominations, the nominations committee meeting times need to sort of flex accordingly. As and when we hear some stuff, but we'll keep everybody in the loop as and when we hear details on that. So thank you for that. Nathan, can we pass over to you to pick up the delivery plan and budget, which I know some people have seen, because we had a couple of sort of separate sessions to this, but not everybody will have seen. And I know there's a couple of questions from Gordon, but if I can pass over to you to make sure we're all on the same page with that, that'd be great.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got a short set of slides to run through the proposed delivery plan and the budget for 21-22, and hopefully you can see those slides on your screens. But just to say, it's been well rehearsed by the LEP Board Director workshop in February, and the various conversations in between, and it's broadly set out as a follow-on iteration of the 2021 delivery plan that evolved over the last extraordinary 12 months to provide a background that continues to implement against the local industrial strategy. It continues to resource our efforts towards economic recovery and to respond to evolving government policy and co-investment opportunities. Again, we've split it out under the annual performance review headings in line with existing guidance. And so firstly, on strategy, there's an ongoing focus on delivery against the recovery plan priorities, things like the convening of the economic recovery group, the various employment skills interventions, and COVID-specific business support interventions. And then regarding LIS, local industrial strategy implementation, we'll see activity across the LIS priority areas, with a range of sectoral interventions and some specific commissions that include environmental land management and whole farm business support development, creative industries network development, development of local industrial strategy and sector-specific data and metrics. And we'll see development work undertaken in data and space, in the fishing sector, food and drink industry, and many more. The focus on energy and climate continues with ongoing development and advocacy across floating offshore wind, geothermal and lithium and biomethane, with energy efficiency through both the Getting Building Fund activity and our steering of the Southwest Energy Hub investment, and an ongoing consideration of net zero opportunities such as the development potential of hydrogen in the region. Regarding G7, as trailed previously, we look to maximise the economic legacy through joint campaigns and trade and investment propositions. And in terms of levelling up, we are proposing to augment our place focus, building on our town deal representation to explore additional town-focused activities, including the development of the town greening initiative with the local nature partnership. And we'll also continue to co-develop the Great Southwest Initiative, working with partners to secure those peninsula-wide ambitions as set out in the prospectus. And although not in the driving seat for Levelling Up Fund and the SPF pilot, we'll continue to champion and advocate for Cornwall and Isles of Scilly's expectations for post-EU investment programming, as well as the ongoing devolution conversations. And finally, on this slide, engagement will focus a lot on our joint work with agents like the National LEP Network to ensure we're front and centre for the upcoming LEP review and ensuring opportunities as trailed in the March release of the government's Build Back Better plan for growth. Moving on to delivery, I don't feel like this slide needs much rehearsing, but the LEP will continue to lead on a range of programmes and initiatives across capital schemes, enterprise zones, employment and skills programming, financial instruments, and business support, each with their own targets and reporting. But a noticeable change in this year's programming is the conclusion of the £78 million growth deal. However, the £14.3 million Getting Building Fund scheme delivery by April 2022 will keep the programmes team busy regardless. And whilst we see the end of aspects of capital programming, we're seeing the continued ramp up of government investment into LEPs and their growth hubs, with growth hub based budget allocations going from £200,000 to £500,000 this year to support our business bed. The other changing year will be the July end of our Coastal Communities Fund augmented and virtual experience WAVE project with Cornwall Museums Partnership and Falmouth University, with all 5 places set to launch their new virtual and immersive museum experiences by late spring in St Agnes, in Looe, Bude, the Isles of Scilly and at Porthcurno. Regarding governance, so notwithstanding the kind of potential parameters around the upcoming LEP review, the key priority for the coming year is the succession planning for the LEP chair and the 2 private sector board directors, along with the potential for changes in local authority representation following the May elections. The board recruitment will be led by the nominations committee, with additional specialist recruitment advice and support being procured. Moving on, so we've been through this roadmap of activity recently at the AGM, so I won't repeat it now, only to highlight the addition of the LEP review scheduled now to report in June or July this year. So the roadmap continues to provide a useful timeline for LEP activity over the next 12 months, with scheduled milestones formally laid out in the delivery plan. And finally, the budget is set out here, as previously highlighted at the budget workshop and audit and assurance committee, and as previous years, the income is all based on known and assumed funding and ring-fenced and unring-fenced carry-forward funds. And expenditure is split out across those strategy, delivery and governance priorities, and made up of a mix of ring-fenced and unring-fenced activities. I just wanted to highlight the key differences in this year's budget, for next year's budget. One is the reduction in the transport budget line, and that's reflecting revised travel norms. An increase in the LEP executive and the commissioned functions budget lines to support additional resource requirement, including Growth Hub and Getting Building Fund programme management. An allocation in this year's budget to progress the Great Southwest Initiative, and a new G7 budget line to support programming, communications and legacy activities. And in terms of delivery there, the main difference is the confirmed uplift in core Growth Hub funds. And also in delivery for the Digital Skills Partnership, the Beacon project and the Skills Advisory Panel, we're still awaiting confirmation of those 21-22 budget allocations. So they're only showing their carry forward figures, the carry forward and ring fenced funds figures. And that was a whistle-stop tour of delivery plan and budget. Mark, if I can hand back to you for further discussion and the recommendations.
Yeah, could get comments first of all. No, Gordon, you had a question you wanted to raise before, but we rattled on. Do you want to pick it up now?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Mark. It's a bit of a last year, this year comment. Looking at the budget monitor narrative from last time round, we've got quite a few areas of underspend and proposed rollover, including in non-ring fenced areas. Looking at the presentation you just showed us, we've got a spend proposed of 75,000 on G7. I mean, my point really is this is never going to happen again. It's a one-off opportunity. I think we're undercooking it a little. The reason I say that is that I know how tight the budget is because I'm sitting on the comms group, and I know that we haven't at the moment got enough money to go beyond local PR agencies to do our media work. So we're going to work with some really excellent local talent who are great at getting us coverage in the regional press. But the point of our opportunity at G7 is to find a way to get to the outlets that people read when they're deciding on investing money and they live in South Korea or Australia or Italy. That means we need PR agency support with national or even international expertise. That's another spend. I would suggest as much as £25,000, and I think it will be a phenomenally good way of spending some money on a one-off opportunity. So my suggestion is rather than live with underspends or have unpurposed rollovers, let's make the decision now while we've got time to actually make a difference. Thanks.
Can I know we've got a couple of hands up, but Poppy, you also work with that group as well. What any thoughts from your perspective on that?
Yeah, I just popped in the chat box. Actually, just totally agree with that. I think there's kind of real limitations on what can be done with the budget as it stands. And as Gordon says, it's absolutely a kind of one-off opportunity. We need to maximise it. And I guess the other thing to say is that the time, as we all know, is really tight. So if we are going to, release more funds for it, we need to make that decision quickly to really capitalise it.
Let's note that, and I know Glenn's been looking at other pots of money that sit alongside. We might pick up in the P&C, but yeah, we might have to move very quickly. And the other thing, if we do decide to act upon that, is actually going to a trusted known partner. I'm a little bit scarred from previous life of jumping into bed with people and they just don't get our business or our organisation. So we might come back. Emmy and then Steve. I think that was the right order.
Yeah, it's just on the point of appointing an out of Cornwall agency, just for benefit of transparency. So I've been working in my day job as CEO of Cornwall Museums Partnership, working with Exeter University as part of our MOU with the university, and we are both working together on a commission about the size of the one that Gordon described, the Let Invest. We've appointed a London PR agency to experiment really to see how we can use the opportunity of the G7 to position new narratives about Cornwall and challenge the sort of perceived London view of us being kind of backward. And so we're focusing on how we can seed stories of innovation, which will be, you know, kind of obviously because we're a museums partnership, it will focus on culture and heritage, but it will also draw attention to contemporary and future plans. So it's just thinking about if we are going to invest more money, which I totally think we should do for all the reasons that Gordon and Poppy have outlined. It's, you know, there's hardly any time and this won't happen again. And we've got a mountain to climb. Then, you know, can we make sure we do it in a joined up way? I guess that's what I'm saying.
You're mute, Mark.
Oh, sorry, it's because I've got an inundated with cats and dogs, and I'm trying to sort of shield you from noise. And no, I will try to summarise that recommendation. And if we can eke out, find, beg, steal, or borrow the monies to do that, knowing and aligning to partners that we know and trust, it will be really important. And any opportunity to simplify, and it might be that if the university are also working with people, that might be another obvious route. Steve.
Yeah, just to endorse exactly what Gordon and Emmy have said. We're running a floating offshore wind event. We've got resources from the council to do that because it's coming from the hopeful to sale of the Wave Hub site. But I do think we also need to engage Cornwall Development Company in this, Mike King, who are looking at the Cornwall trade and industry approach. And I've just don't at the moment have a sense of coherence, because there seems to be a lot going on, but no coherence. I don't know what the strategy is and I don't know what the plan is. I'm just hoping though that that Glenn will be able to tell us, don't worry, it's all okay, or not.
Glenn will be joining us later on. I think it's more okay than not, but I don't think it's as okay as we'd like it to be. And one of the reasons we made that decision to second Glenn to that role was growing unease that we weren't joining up, particularly with private sector partners. Mike is now working with Glenn, so I think I think there's a good description of lots of the stuff that is being done. That's not to say more could be done, but if we can just hold that challenge when Glenn joins us a little later on. Poppy?
Yeah, can I just jump in there? I know we'll talk more later on, but I think that kind of coherence and the ability to join up messaging and amplify where possible is absolutely key to this. It's something we've been talking about from the start. So just a plea really to kind of, if people have got elements of comments that are happening, to let us know so that we can try as much as to join that up and bring Katie.
Yeah, thank you, Poppy. Yeah, thank you, Poppy. And I think for clarity, what we're saying is our LEP bit is the economic legacy. There's lots of communication happening from, you know, security, young people, every aspect of this. And we're saying now the bit that we're going to focus on is how can we emphasize, accelerate, disrupt the thinking around this is a place for particularly private investment, particularly aligning to the government's clean growth agenda, which we talked about before and colleagues have alluded to. So that is our bit, and Katie and co will sit as part of a communications group around Cornwall partners, even though their activity will be somewhere else, just to make sure that we understand what's going on and what's getting what's aligned. And then, as I say, having Glenn as that role will be helpful, but I think there's a clear instruction from the board to look again at the budgets and see if we can carve out more monies to do that part of the plan. If there's any advice from those of you who operate in this area, because my experience is probably 6 years out of date now, of trusted partners in that respect, that people can get it, because you could burn 25 grand quickly on people that don't get it or get the messaging wrong. That will be really helpful, and if we can then piggyback on each other's work, that would be helpful. Oh, Mark, sorry, do you want to come in?
It was on something different, Mark, but it was on this particular item. So if people want to talk about comms, I'm quite happy to come in afterwards.
Are we okay with that? So we'll issue a challenge back to the executive. Always good when Glenn walks into a meeting halfway through to have him ambushed, but I'm sure we'll we'll find a way. But the caveat is that we just do it in a very coherent way, and if there's people we know and trust personally, that we can put their feet to the radiator to make sure they do this for us, because we'll still be a small part of their big organisation, which always worries me. Then absolutely we'll do it, and we'll pick up with Katie, and we'll also maybe do by written procedure, because we won't have another meeting unless we formally do an informal one, just maybe come back to the group on what the communications plan is, because I know it's been very dynamic. So we'll either do it as a separate piece, or we'll just book some informal time, and if people can join us, that'll be great. But and with the instruction of, mind the gap, what was it we're not doing that we should be, particularly maybe is the description. Right, so that's that done on that. Mark, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It was just a question about the delivery plan and 21-22 strategy priorities around recovery, levelling up, energy and climate, and communication engagement. I just wondered where space and spaceport sits against those, and how we're seeing that.
Shall I take that one? Yeah.
Yes,
so I think there's so much in that, the local industrial strategy implementation kind of aspect of our strategic kind of priorities that there wasn't enough room to articulate all of them, I guess. So the space and data stuff, Mark, as we know, there's lots of work going on as part of those working groups. But as we can see in the kind of the timeline for the year, the things like the launch expectation for launch in 2022 and things like that, and our investment, getting building fund investment around the airport infrastructure and things like that, demonstrates there is activity going on. But it feels like we probably need to do more in our articulation of what's going on in every specific industrial area. And some of that might tease its way out of the G7 kind of campaign documentation, and how we articulate all of the myriad things that are going on in the different areas. It's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, I think I think it's a fair point, because space, the conversations that evolved from the applications of data, we've had conversations with a number of businesses doing unmanned aerial vehicles, and there's a sort of proposition which we've sort of been pushing CDC to put together about how Lizard Peninsula facilities on their Land's End, Newquay. So we've got businesses, one of which is promising a very significant investment, private money led, to be part of the supply chain and training infrastructure for space, energy, and all sorts of things. And so space is sort of creeping out to all those adjacent areas as well. So it might be worth, Nathan, trying to articulate that with I don't know who would be best, with a Gale, or you're just trying to, so the board is cited on, it's not just the space bit that's been in the headlines. The conversations are mostly with all the bits around it, which is encouraging because they'll employ people. But it's we'll try to bring that back. Any other thoughts or comments on the plan? I know we've rehearsed this a couple of times, but no. Okay, so I think we need a decision on this, don't we? We just need to ratify that we like the plan, albeit that there's some actions arising, particularly around the communications policy and the and some of the sectoral stuff, which will, Caroline, make sure we articulate properly in the minutes, and we'll carry forward as action plans. But if people are happy that the draft plan, and I would say draft as well, I think we're in a very dynamic situation politically, economically, in every way. So I think this is a really good starting point. And I think we said it as part of our subgroup, so we just have to be agile as and when opportunities arise, be it coming out of G7 or whatever. And we can see things around, particularly the energy portfolio, rattling on quite quickly, and we might have to come back to this. And we also know some work with our traditional sectors, which again might change emphasis. But at the moment, this is what we can see, and if we're happy to approve this, and then we'll bring back to the board if we do find that we get to some junctions and we've got move, but I don't want, you know, at the end of the day we've got to deliver, so we'll look at those when and if they arrive. So if people are happy, if they could do the hand thing, that would be great. And Emma, if you could tell us when we've done.
I'd like to support this as well, Mark, please. Fran.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Fran.
Thank you. I can confirm that the recommendation has been carried.
Great. Well, thank you for those, and thank you for everybody that took part in all the work to get to that stage. Carol, have we got Malcolm on the line? Have we been chasing him? We're running ahead of time, which is unusual for us.
I know that Malcolm's, because he's got in touch to say he's in the waiting room. I'm not sure if there's an issue, but
we'll just see whether we can.
Yeah, I can't see him in the lobby.
If people bear with me, I'll just message him and see if he can. With Malcolm, he's drowning in all sorts of demands with his time at the moment. So okay, so do people just want to take maybe 5-minute quick natural break, stretch the legs, and we'll chase Malcolm down. We're 10 minutes ahead of schedule. I'll go and round up dogs and cats, and if we can be back again in just at say 11:25ish. And we'll go again and if not, we'll do the enterprise zone board. Steve, an update on that, and then we'll come back. Okay, so just a few minutes, quick stretch legs. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Malcolm.
Welcome.
Hello. Just trying to read your.
Yeah, no, we were running ahead of time, so we just had a couple of us who were starting to fidget. So we're just going to kick off at 11:25, so a couple of minutes of that. So
okay.
We're actually running ahead of schedule, which is a bit unusual for us.
I just tried to come on the laptop as well. Has Debbie got my slides? Because I'm not sure I can share them from the phone.
Malcolm, I can drive if you like. I think Debbie sent them to me.
Okay, then I'll stay on the phone then, rather than try to get the computer to work again.
Could I just ask, we're not online at the moment, are we?
Yes, we are.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, we're online at this stage, Malcolm. We've got a couple of other this item and another item. Then we've got a private session a little later on.
Yeah, the live stream continues through the break. So.
Thank you.
And Nathan, you got the latest updates presentation?
I will just,
if not, I can cover it. I love the technology.
Brilliant. I think everybody's coming back. So thank you, everybody. I'm just trying to see who's. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we'll thank you for that. And if people are all back, if you're back, just stick a hand up if you would, so we can sort of see who hasn't stuck the hand up.
I'm back, Mark. It's Fran.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so as you come back, if you just stick your hand up and then we can just see, we'll just do one more go, just stick your hand up, if you're there. Perfect.
I am here, but I can't raise my hand for some reason.
No worries. I think there's only Mark that hasn't raised his hand, so we'll kick off and let Mark. Perfect. So if you put the hands down, thank you for that. Oh God, I'm putting my hand up everything. Right. Yeah, so just before I get Nathan and Malcolm, or Nathan to introduce Malcolm to lead it, I just want to, again, from our point of view, thank Malcolm for the amount of work he's doing on two fronts, really. One is to help develop the work on what we would like our visitor economy to look like going forward, and appreciate this has got to be something which is owned by Cornwall, places and bodies and organisations. So it's very much conversation at this point. So, and again, trying to pull together an awful lot of partners and trying to describe the issue and the actions, but also from my point of view, Malcolm, the amount of work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis in terms of the reopening, the recovery, the whole point. You've done a massive amount of work supporting that, so thank you very much. So Nathan, do you want to pick up and introduce Malcolm, and I'll hand over to you two?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just really briefly, the work on the sustainable tourism strategy has been going on in the background for some time, and it was kind of interrupted by the pandemic and the refocus on the various tourism recovery plans and other practical efforts that Mark's just mentioned. Malcolm's going to take a presentation to highlight the work that's going on. It's been co-developed by a number of stakeholders and partners to support this shared vision for the future of tourism, and a framework that kind of recognises and tries to address some of the stakeholder tensions, the tourism impact, distribution of tourism, and climate-related kind of adaptations. It's going to hopefully provide an opportunities guide to support the wider visitor economy to become year-round, sustainable and productive. But I won't steal any of Malcolm's thunder, so I'll just I'll hand over, Malcolm, if that's okay.
Thank you, and I'm glad you said that, because I feel like a bit like a magpie. Lots of the things in here have been pulled from lots of other people. So actually, even though it's been delayed, we had a tourism week where lots of people contributed, and we're actually going into a wider consultation over the next month with various groups from education, culture, the sustainability agenda people. So this is in a way a run through. There's two other big bits of research that are in train at the moment. One which will be very interesting, well, both will be fascinating to receive. One is on the community attitudes to tourism, and that's being conducted using a national panel. So it's a representative sample. It's not one of these ones of just have a poll and see who replies. It's been done as a representative sample of the people of Cornwall and their views, and that will be benchmarked then against one we did in 2012 and also one recently done in Kent. So that'll give us some parameters of where things have shifted. The other one is a lot more detailed into a business survey of actually who owns visitor economy businesses, where are the employees, where are the supply chains, and building a far better economic model of the impact of the visitor economy, including into the professional sectors and other sectors. But I'll speed on through a few slides. So I'm afraid it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster of PowerPoint colours. And you'll tell that I like colouring in when I was a kid, and it's now just gone into my presentations. So on to the first slide.
And if we pop it on full screen, if we can, Nathan.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I thought it was.
Okay. Right, so quickly some key stats. Basically, tourism has sort of plateaued over the last few years. It's been around 4.5, 5 million, but more nearer 5 million visitors, but 24, 25 million bed nights. But it does employ an awful lot of people in terms of directly and indirectly. And in addition to those 24 million staying visitors, what you have got is obviously day visitors, which we don't tend to count, but it's about 40 million day visits, because economically that's within the area. Next slide. Okay. Is there another one? There should be another one. There's a few more to go, Nathan.
Sorry, I'm not sure if it's coming through on my, me trying to drive this, actually, because it's moving on mine.
Oh, is it? Right, well, this one should just point out the number of people furloughed, because it hasn't moved on mine. So this is going to be fun. Which actually in January, we found there's 4,000 people on furlough at the moment, and an additional 23,000 people on universal credit. So it's got quite an impact. The next slide, which has now popped up, if it's the same one I'm on, is around the seasonality factor. And even though we've worked quite hard on some of the shoulders, you'll see there's still this massive amount of business, which is really the school holidays in July and August. And that's the bit where we really start hitting sustainability issues. So, you know, it's just under half the business is around that time of year. Next slide, Nathan. Which hopefully should be key messages. Yep. The key messages, I'm not going to dwell too long on here because there's some I'll pick up more than others. The first one is it's the quality of the environment in Cornwall and the quality of life in Cornwall that is the tourism asset. It's as simple as that. And we have got to be careful and manage the issue of over-tourism. We touched it recently, in not so much last year, ironically. I think it felt that way, but certainly years before. And we've also got to understand that, you know, in going forward, there is really no growth potential in August, especially with a growing population in Cornwall. And that's got to be really understood. And you know, if you look at about another 50,000 people living in Cornwall in the next decade, that's an awful lot of extra day trips. But we've got a once in my lifetime opportunity to tackle out of season because of demographic changes and post-COVID changes, which I'll come on to. So whereas it's always been a desire to grow out of season, now we have those opportunities. And I think we've got to look at, and this is more the regenerative agenda, is when we develop tourism, how is it a force for good, not anything else? But I'll also pick up the last bullet point on that slide. Oh, it's gone now. Which is, you know, why haven't we got a national or even international centre for research and development in driving sustainable and regenerative tourism? So if you want to move on, Nathan. And then the next one down, move on, and the next one down again. Sorry about this, guys. And the next one with the pretty circles on, prove I can do colouring. This one I just want to spend a couple of seconds on. Oh, go back one. For those old enough to remember Bernie the Bolt and the whatever it was, Golden Shot. This is bringing together four agendas, really. What we've looked at is when tourism development happened in the 1969 Tourism Development Act, the 1980s, 1990s, it was jobs, 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 never mind the quality, feel the width. Unemployment was high, very market driven, not much consideration given the environmental communities. 87 World Sustainable Development goals came in, 1990s, early noughties, a lot of things on sustainable tourism, which was really talking about don't do too much harm, try to limit the harm. The thing about regenerative development, it's not about doing harm, it should be doing good. And then how do we drive on many of those similar agendas around energy usage, waste, compatibility, all sorts of issues? How does that actually provide benefits above and beyond some economic and employment benefits for a community? And the last one, very important for Cornwall, this one, compared with my colleagues in cities, is the circular economy. A Premier Lodge room will generate £31,000 worth of economic activity per room. That's what turnover, business turnover Premier Inn, £31,000 a room for each room in Cornwall. A large chunk of that goes out. If you take a B&B on similar types of income, far more sticks in the local economy with the butcher, the cabinet maker, the painter, the decorator. So that's what we've actually said in looking at this strategy going forward. If you click the next slide, Nathan, which is the ultimate one, is the strategy is really pulling together all these agendas to say, right, we need to have it regenerative, we need to make sure it's sustainable, maximizes the circular economy while still meeting the needs of customers. At the end of the day, that's about choosing your customers. Without their spend, none of this agenda happens, but that's achievable. And that's why we're talking about managed and selective growth, because we have an industry that is 100% sometimes of the year, often above 90% capacity. Other times of the year, it can be down to as low as 50%, even lower. Some businesses are operating at 85% all year round. So we can grow that spare utilization, that spare capacity. So what does this mean if we go on a couple of slides? Nathan, to the managed growth, that's it. Next one. So the big two messages in this strategy is we have got to resolve the employment issues, and that's a big issue. It's a massive employer with not enough progression. Just because you enter at a level on a basic entry-level wage doesn't mean you should be there if you don't desire that. In 2 or 3 years' time, we've got to get ways of progressing people. But the other one is, rather than talk about extending the season, let's be bold and go for build back from the winter. That's when we've got greatest capacity. And by building back from the winter, growing that times, utilising that extra capacity is where you start to tackle the other big problem in the sector, which is productivity. So it's a matter of actually tackling productivity and employment. And the process of that is getting customers down here at the time of year we need them and to the places we need them. So the other aspects are here is we do need better market intelligence to really target that, although we have got some. We do need to develop the products of the future, which have got to be sustainable, regenerative, and a lot of them built on the experience market. There's a wonderful, horrible thing that tourism marketeers come up with, which is that it's all about sightseeing, sight doing these days, not sightseeing. And that can be a great thing in terms of the regenerative agenda on the environment and other aspects. We've got to be more inclusive and accessible and inclusive across the ethnic diversity of the country. So we can be more inclusive in that area. And there's a lot more about actually the attract and disperse strategy, but I'm not going to go through every bullet point on there. And we've got to look at how some of these burgeoning experiences can also improve the ability for local people to get a better cultural and leisure offer. So the proposed mission is up there. It is a team game. I know that's an overused word, Team Cornwall, almost cringe, but tourism does touch everything. But we do need to work together for that managed growth that will improve the quality of life for visitors as well as residents. So I will pass on that one and move on to the next slide. So the vision for Cornwall is to have the same or less, should be, staying visitors in July and August, and looking for about 20% growth out of season. And if you go back, and I'll show you that slide again, that does make very little difference in terms of the load factors on Cornwall. But we've got to do that by leading on being sustainable and regenerative, but also targeting those markets to be competitive. And the whole area around cultural leisure, I call it passions. Cultural tourism I totally buy into, but it's people's passions and interests, and they can be quite diverse, as you can if you look at your TV channels, or the various channels. And as I said, tackling those big issues around quality of employment and progression. And last but never least, the whole issue around the low carbon. And that means probably starting looking at this market growth of being a lot closer to home than we would normally consider. So a lot of this market would be within the southwest of the country. Next slide. The next one, which is quite controversial, is we are talking about value, not volume. And the motorhomers who keep writing to me don't agree with that one at the moment. Anyway, it's about quality, not quantity. Cornwall does carry a premium price, just like our cheese and our wines do and our beers do. We want to have that. We do want to get the greatest yield from our visitors while they're happy as they can be. And that does mean that we do have to be quite targeted on that. And that does mean premium campsites, premium lodges. It's not just about 5-star and Michelin restaurants, but it's a premium product across the whole range. Thank you, Nathan. On to the next slide. Then probably that's it, thanks. So what does this mean? Well, let's look at the supply side. It does mean that if we've had at the moment the biggest rise in the supply side, if I told you Newquay's probably lost a minimum of 20,000, if not 30,000 bed spaces since the beginning of the century, but we've had Airbnb and we've had other issues. And there's some great providers in Airbnb. I'm not having to go at Airbnb providers or the platform, but what it has is lowered the point of entry. And we do believe we need a statutory or a compulsory registration scheme in Cornwall so that we know what stock we've got, and we also can make sure they do comply with all the regulations, and we can engage with them on this agenda. More controversial, and probably very controversial, is maybe, and it's a maybe, in certain areas, and we do have areas like St Ives, Rock and other areas, even a discussion on compulsory licensing to control the amount of stock to help with communities staying viable and people being able to live there. Very controversial, that one. But we also need minimum standards of sustainability. If we are going to lead on sustainable and regenerative tourism, we do need everybody to do their part. And whereas there are minimum standards, and it could be an accolade and voluntary, but we do need to up that. We're already leading as an area on green tourism. I think we just got to crank it up a lot more. And also we need more effective working with communities and more engagement with communities on this agenda. And I'll hopefully come back to that later if I remember. Next slide, also on the supply side. And this is it. In terms of actually really understanding the full costs and benefits of tourism, does come back to that research and development centre based at the university, pulling on what the trends are and how we make them sustainable and how we make them positive. And then that would feed in to the wise development of new products and services. Tourism is evolving very, very fast. And we need to make sure that we evolve the products that meet the needs of Cornwall as well as the market. And as I said, then it obviously is about productivity. And obviously we do need to help businesses and the supply chain to meet their needs on the carbon agenda and general waste agenda as well. And that's the supply side. So it's about capacity building within the sector as well as actually targeting the right areas for growth. Next slide. Speed up a bit. On the demand side, if we're going to really tackle out of season, I mean, it's brilliant what we've had over the summer. I mean, it's been a bit boring, winter rather. Every programme on a Monday night seems to be about Cornwall. Everybody's done a programme on Cornwall. The rest of the country is steaming mad. My disappointment in one regard is always being greedy is it's great to have all those programmes, but they always showed it in the summer. There's a great experience to have here in the winter. And if we're really going to change the reputation of the area and bring on a Cornwall you'd love, we do need to get behind that, as well as managing those existing markets and disperse. We are more than, Eden, Padstow and St Ives. No disrespect to those areas intended. And as I said, this build back, and I'm going to pick up on the demographic change. The other thing is we've got very stuck in our ways of what we think events are. And I want to come on later about what events could be. And we do need a real review of the strategic approach on events. The next 2 or 3 slides, I'm going to fly through at a rate of knots, so I warn you. This is just a grid, which I hope you can share these slides afterwards, Nathan, to say this is not Visit Cornwall. This has got to be between agencies the industry, bids, local councils and everybody. And therefore we've split out some of these things of who will lead on what. So if you can fly through those next 3 slides and move on to new growth opportunities, Nathan. Yeah. So I talked earlier on, somebody might have said, well, Belle, you've been doing this job for 25 years on and off covering the Southwest. So why do you think you can tackle the seasonality now? Well, first of all, they've got the richest generation we'll ever have in the baby boomers. 25 years ago, pensioners were the lowest, probably lowest 2 quartiles of disposable income. They're often now seniors and pensions the highest 2. And a lot of interest in wildlife and nature, and you've only got to see Winter Watch. They're also very worried, so see with the grey hair, to stay fit for when COVID 20 or 25 comes along. And there's growing interest in terms of people now wanting to escape their sanctuary, which has now turned into their office. And basically the whole stress that's going on at the moment and the ability to work where you want. And there are still opportunities in that overseas market for spring for very high spenders. And there's a lot of development we can do in the new business agenda. All these agile companies now that won't have very big offices that need to do their business planning with dispersed teams. They can come and do that in Cornwall in October, November. They can do their budget finalisation over a couple of days or more in January and February. And they can do beach cleans and they can do things of team building that are actually not just corporate stuff I had to go through in my younger days, but actually do good. Might even be helping community projects. And then, as I said, there's this whole area of building on experiences, you know, multi-generational holidays. People now understand and just want to be together a lot more. And as I said, a lot of other aspects in there. So that's where the huge market, and a lot of that market is in the winter. Next slide, Nathan. I will come to an end soon, I promise you. And this is the £200 million plus opportunity. Ooh. And that comes from, thank you, it's actually modelled in a bit on £240 million. It's a big turnover operation, tourism, so a little bit of growth gives you big money. Next slide, Nathan. So as I said, there are market changes, and I will go through these because I think I've just said them actually. This is this whole demographic change, dispersed families, fitness, accessibility. I'll come on to some of the products. Next one. I think working families, I think we've concentrated, a lot of stress is needed, a lot of ability to get away, a lot of need for a survival break. If you're working from home and you're living at home and you're both trying to work from home at times, people need and families need to get away. And the last one is, as I said, this whole thing about where people can work, and all of that has to be sustainable. So on to the slides on seasonality again. And again, flicking through to the next one and the next one, because I might as well just do it. If you lifted those shoulders, you will see, thank you, stick on that one. You will see that lifting those shoulders by 20% in the darkest times of the winter does not add that many people visiting Cornwall. I would say most people wouldn't actually notice the visitor increase, but it brings all that extra turnover. Next slide. Don't expect you to read that, but what it does show is those green are new opportunities and orange are growth opportunities. There's lots of themes that we can bring into play, and I just want to pull out a few of these. I said earlier on about festivals and events. If we take that apart, that a festival draws people, we could have exciting things going on in the winter, such as beach walking events. When you get a week where the tides are out in the middle of the day, particularly spring tides, you have the opportunity to do massive walks on the beach. You have the rock pools, you have nature. So you have a whole theme around the week of the coast. Other times, particularly about now, you can have the spring in Cornwall, which is more about nature as well as gardens. You can have whole things around fitness. You can have cultural weeks. So one of the ideas we sort of talked about is the fact that if you take cold water swimming, if that was on different beaches at different times with a cafe with everything laid on, that cafe might only open one day a week in the winter, but that's one day it wouldn't normally open. So if we actually thought more creatively about how we have distributed events right across Cornwall on a theme, we can generate a lot of extra visitation without hardly any capital cost. I wouldn't say there wouldn't be any. It's one of the things we've got to tease out with the cultural sector and the wildlife sector of what costs it would be. In the recent weeks, Falmouth Bay in particular, as well as Mounts Bay, has been full of dolphins, minke whales, fin whales, all the stuff that is very high value tourism. But I'm not going to go through too many of those. You can see there's an ever-growing list. Next slide, Nathan. Yes, and again, look at this at your leisure. The one thing I'm just going to shout out some numbers here. If we grew that 20%, and it's different at different times of the year and no growth in the summer, £240 million, that would be around 77 million to the accommodation, 45 to retail and the high streets, 65 to food and drink, just under 30 for heritage culture, and 25 for travel. It would actually generate, if they were new jobs, the equivalent of around 2,300. What excites me most is that it's more likely to enhance anywhere between 5 and 12,000 existing jobs by extending them. And this is what we've got to do a lot more modelling on, and we will do as this goes through, and also the productivity gains that are possible, and give it a real hard due diligence and test, because it's easy to come up with big numbers. But I'm just trying to explain and demonstrate there's great opportunities, and what I'm excited about is to start doing something about enhancing the jobs we have in the sector and the career prospects. And the last slide, before I send you all to sleep. So, build back from the winter, quite reasonably low cost. I'm not talking cheap, but nothing like massive capital projects. It would improve the employees and the prospects of those workers, those 53,000 workers that work in the sector. It'll increase their employment progression. It will make more profits for the industry to reinvest, including in staff development. The high streets, the food, the culture, all I've said, the productivity. It would assist with the levelling up agenda, because if you just nudge hospitality and tourism up, that will help move towards that. It's not this sort of salvation, but it would be a contributor. And I think, you know, by delivering this through a regenerative, low carbon tourism, it supports our green Cornwall brand. And the last slide I'm not going to bother with. I'll put it up, Nathan, just for a laugh. I'll explain that when it take me too long to explain that. If you start off with a bit of public priming of marketing and development, the public sector can then exit and the private sector will pick up and keep it going. And that's been proven time and time again. So with that, I think I'm just going to go a quick bit on the next steps, which is to consult with all those groups. It is to get those research in, and it is to do it. If you can move on to the future scenarios. Oh, sorry, I should do that one. Back from 1995 is when I first did a talk. I contributed to a tourism strategy. I've been involved in every one of those. And quite a lot of that stuff has happened, but not in the best and most coherent way. So my worry is, on the next one, Nathan, is, sorry, you can skip over that one. Yep, is we can do nothing, but we will get the growth you don't want. People will grow, we will get supply growth, it will happen. We can do something which is partial intervention and maybe slowing or even avoiding some of the worst aspects of over-tourism. But I think if we got clever, we could actually get on the back of this change of waves in demographics and wealth and post-COVID, and actually start to really tackle something at relatively little investment in the big term of things. And that's the end of my lecture, I'm afraid, and I apologise if I've come across a bit too evangelistic, but having spent 25 years, I'm actually quite excited about this in my grey-haired old age.
No, thank you, Malcolm. And I know we've been talking about this for a little while now, and in a time when we've been overwhelmed by events, but it has come on a long way, and we've had lots of conversations with, I know, many different industry groups and sector groups and such like, which has been really helpful. Any questions or comments? Linda, your hand's up. Is that an old hand or a new hand?
That is a brand new hand.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Linda, do you want to go first, please?
Yeah, thank you. Malcolm, that was an incredible whistle-stop tour of 25-year strategy, bang up to date. But I do want to ask two particular questions. The first one is about brand jacking, which I have spoken to you before about. And so the the research and development support for a centre of excellence or expertise, would that be an issue that they could be actually looking at in relation to brandjacking? Because I am obviously, as I've said to you before, really concerned about the amount of money that does leave Cornwall under that umbrella. So I would welcome to hear what you're going to say about that. And then you very quickly mentioned how controversial registration was. So we have got easy targets in Cornwall. We've got our hotels and we've got our bed and breakfast. But if we're looking to see what accommodation providers there are in Cornwall, is that registration, which is, as you said, controversial, would that include places like Airbnb, camping, Cornwall Council or National Trust wild camping provision? I'd be quite interested to hear the scope of that registration. And I would also like to know, would it be purely to identify capacity, or are you looking then to progress into inspection, potential or grading? Thank you.
Okay, I'll do the one on brandjacking. Actually, we tried an initiative before, and I think that's where the centre does come into it, and also have been looking at an organisation with Pennies and other people. But we did have an initiative which is still actually owned by us in Cumbria and the Forest, called Fair Booking. And I think what we'd love is that centre to help us to push that forward, to get the idea of fair trading, but fair booking. And we do own that, actually, as a way of getting people to think that actually 20% of their money or 15 to 20% of their money is going to somebody else. And that did have a contribution rate of 20% of, so in other words, bringing it down from 20% to about 5% commission. And we are looking to see how we could do that in Visit Cornwall. So that's very much on the agenda. What we would need is, again, some comms to get that out, and also, you know, the expertise and help to put that together. On the registration for side, yes, the industry are actually prepared to pay for this now. A while ago it wouldn't. They are prepared to pay. They would pay the council to have the resources to undertake the work. It would require devolved. It's actually on the Statute Book of Parliament, never been enacted since 1969. So the request to Parliament would be, could Cornwall pilot the compulsory registration, which would then mean it would be law that people have to register with Cornwall Council. And then they would actually also have the ability then to inspect, because of the income coming in, the high risk properties. Obviously some are higher risk than others. Grading, I think, would be something we would look at encouraging, because it's actually hard to actually make that compulsory. So, and I'm working on a paper for that, which I, along with the industry, on how it would work and actually pilot it, and also working with London on that. And there is some interest from other parts of the country, and I think there'd be support for Cornwall to pilot it. And the principle is that you would still have a free market, but everybody would have to be registered and have to be told exactly what the rules are. So it would be 100% of all property would have to all providers of accommodation would have to be registered. And that itself would probably control some of the oversupply issues.
Mark, may I just come back for clarification? So when you say about registration for all accommodation providers, are you going to be taking into consideration Airbnb, camping sites and wild camping? Lovely, thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Linda. And certainly that registration thing in the height of the COVID stuff last year really got brought to the fore. If only we'd have known. Gordon, do you want to? I think sorry if I got the hands in the wrong order. I apologise. It's just the order it's come up on my screen.
It is a fresh hand. 3 rapid things. One on that last point. While the government is talking about doing away with red tape, I would be very nervous about being part of a LEP that is calling for a new layer of red tape. On the Tourism Centre of Excellence, I couldn't agree more with Malcolm, and it's good that he mentions the idea of research and market intel and data analysis. We've been talking about that since I joined the board of Visit Cornwall many years ago. I mean, that was a long time, and Falmouth University have had so many opportunities to engage with the idea of a national centre of excellence and us working together on it. They've never taken us up on it. If we're interested in that genuinely, The two best tourism universities in the UK are probably Surrey and Bournemouth, and I'd be more than happy to help us engage with them to see if they want to open a centre of excellence down here and wake Falmouth up. And finally, nuts and bolts thing, an awful lot of people are going to experience Cornwall for the first time this summer, peak season. We all know about Fridays and Saturdays. They'll go home having had a dreadful experience if we don't do something about that. And I would suggest that G7 is going to be a great opportunity for Devon and Cornwall Constabulary to show how good they are at traffic management when the spotlight is on them. How about the LEP engages with them now to declare major incidents every Friday afternoon and Saturday morning through the summer, so we can just get it right for once. Enough.
Thanks, Gordon. Mark's put his hand up when he started mentioning universities, so I think we'll come back to that in a minute. In the order, I think it was Claire, I think, next, so apologies if I've got this completely wrong.
Hi, it's just a question for Malcolm, really. You know, with these various changes, sort of consultation and with the planners seems to be quite critical, and I just wondered, you know, within this process, whether how much consultation you were having with them about sort of helping this process and helping, you know, businesses, I'm thinking farms, I suppose, diversifying into winter activities and so on, and having the planning help to do that.
That is and it's added to the list. They are a very effective tool for the wise development, but they can also be a tool to stop wise development.
You're mute, Mark.
Oh,
sorry. Every time a dog barks, I put it on mute, and then you know, when it goes quiet. Claire, are you okay? Was there anything else? Just want that noted. Okay. On my screen it just says office, but I think that's John.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation, Marco. I'm sure you've covered everything that is conceivably coverable in tourism, but the question I've got is about, I mean, you mentioned sustainable, low carbon, environmental, which you know, some of the sort of key areas that businesses and sectors look at. But one thing that's kind of emerging that businesses are looking at is climate risk. They call it climate risk. I think it's possibly downside, but upsides as well. And I just wonder, you probably covered it in your presentation, but I think I might have missed it, in terms of how does Cornwall sit with regard to climate risk, and is it part of the vision in some way or other, or is it too far down the track to be of relevance at this point? Because certainly there are some businesses that are seeing, you know, climate change as affecting their businesses both positively and negatively, and I just wonder what, if any, thought have been given to that in Cornwall for the future.
It's sort of touched on, but you're quite right, needs more teasing out, because you're absolutely right, especially about extreme weather events, actually in the shortish term. For instance, if Boscastle flood had happened, that pour of rain had happened 6 miles south, there would have been about 12,000 people in campsites that could have been affected if it had hit near Newquay. So we have got to look at something we work on, because obviously some particular campsites were built in the valleys, in low poor farming land, but it's actually now almost in danger of being in floodplains. So we have got to look at particularly extreme weather aspects in terms of it, and with the resilience for them. So I think it is one aspect we've got to look at. The other one, which is interesting in terms of you know, on the global thing of climate change, there is a lot of push to say that, you know, one of the challenges for people's behaviour is flying is a big contributor. So if you are just having a break to reconnect with your loved ones, just have a break, then there's a lot of push to say you don't need to get on the plane anymore, and that again is winter work. So there's a sort of plus and a minus on the climate change agenda in terms of people's perceptions. But I think that whole thing around extreme weather, you know, 2014, it was 2014 I think, and the storms proved, you know, we are vulnerable to those issues. I'm not just talking about Dawlish, but the Idle Rocks Hotel has now been built to withstand that storm, whereas before it just got smashed up. So we do have to factor that in. It is sort of in there, but it does need to be teased out more.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned Boscastle actually, because and you mentioned about all the TV programmes. I took quite a lot of footage on the day of the flood in Boscastle. There's been quite high demand for it during COVID for these programmes, so you can look out for that.
John, I think it was Emmy next.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Malcolm. I just had a couple of points to add. The first one was around culture, and I know you said you're going to engage with the cultural sector, and I know some invites have already gone out. I just, for the benefit of the wider group, I just wanted to kind of share the perspective that culture and an authentic version of Cornwall is not just for local people. It's actually part of managing tourist behaviour in a more and encouraging more respectful engagement with communities than perhaps we've had over the last summer. So not only did we see last summer an uptick in heritage vandalism, we also saw some quite worrying behaviour around disturbing wildlife and people, I think, unintentionally not understanding how to respect the natural environment. So some of the things that you've talked around watching dolphins and seals, for instance, you know, there's quite a lot of concern from people in the wildlife community about how some people were doing that in a way that is really detrimental to those animals. So I think there's a big role for the cultural sector in engaging local and visiting people in how to behave and doing that in a positive and interesting way. Related to that is something which I think about every time we're thinking about people coming into Cornwall, and the place that they pretty much all go, which is Cornwall Services, which does not deliver an experience along the lines of the ones that you've just described around a premier visitor. In terms of communicating our rich food and drink offer and our cultural and artistic offer, it doesn't do that at all, and that's as polite as I can be. But is there a way that we can do something about that? Because it really matters. That's the first impression, often the first and last impression of coming into Cornwall, and it's not on message and it doesn't fit with your strategy. And then two other things. One is the sustainability, the kind of badge idea. I've been talking to Plymouth University, and one of their, I think their graduate startups is developing, some people on the call might know about it, an eco badge for the food and drink sector. I think it's already in prototype phase. So I can put you in touch with people at Plymouth University if you're interested in knowing more about that. They were talking to me about it as a potential thing that could be scaled into the cultural sector. And then the bigger point is around metrics and a strategy based on the metrics that matter. And I'm asking myself, when we look at the graphs, are we looking at the right kinds of numbers if we're talking about sustainability? And actually, should we be looking at graphs about carbon footprint and looking at the change in relation to that set of information, which we're looking at traditional measures, which is people into the county and jobs and bed spaces. So I presume a phase of this will be to apply the strategy to Cornwall Council's very good decision-making wheel based on donut economics, and that might flush out some of those issues. But I wonder what changes we would make to the strategy if we looked at carbon footprint first.
Okay, now that, again, I think particularly, I mean, in fact, actually 10 years ago, I was involved in developing a model before I came back to Cornwall called REAP, which was actually carbon footing different experiences. And I think that's what needs to be brought back in. So you can actually, as you said, quite rightly say, you don't measure it, you don't manage it. I couldn't agree more on that. I think working with Cornwall Council on that issue of what is, and also not just the carbon footprint, but also in calculation, also adds to the economy. So I don't know if it's carbon footprint and highest economic value should be the priorities. I couldn't agree more on sustainability. Cornwall Services a share, but I think I need to go up there and have a chat with them. Yeah, I think the other one is also this just to keep people. At the moment, we're talking to people about plan, book, and enjoy. as they come, there's going to be a lot of messaging around protect and respect and enjoy. It is about protecting yourself, but also protecting Cornwall and respecting Cornwall and wildlife. So I couldn't agree more on the need to actually get that message out so that the maximum number of people do the right thing. And unfortunately, we can't do much about the minority. What we can do is to stop those who don't know they're doing wrong by informing them what's right. So thanks for that, Emmy.
Thanks, Emmy. Mark?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it was Gordon's mention of Surrey that kind of prompted me to come in. We actually recruited the Dean of Exeter's Business School from Surrey, and he oversaw the development of that tourism group in Surrey when he was Dean of the Surrey Business School. And we do have a master's degree in international tourism management, but it happens to be based for historical reasons on our Exeter campus rather than our Cornwall campus. So we do have staff who work in this area. There probably aren't enough of them at the moment to constitute a major global research centre, but that could be changed. We have just been awarded the leadership of the UK's new research hub for circular economy, and we're leading on that for the whole of the UK. So just seeing that diagram with the circular economy overlapping with tourism was really interesting, because I think there is something we could do in that space. So just to say that, I mean, I'm very happy to take this conversation away and go back to the Dean of our business school and replay this with him. What I would say is that, like tourism, any research centre has to be sustainable, and it's got to operate within the financial parameters that the university has to operate within. But given all of that, I mean, I think it's tremendously exciting. I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm very happy to kind of go back to him and say, you know, could he have a think about this, given his experience at Surrey.
Now, if you want any bag carriers in that, Mark, we will happily be there with you. We have been working with Jane Wills at, I think she's based in the Penryn campus, I think.
Yeah,
so
she is.
Doing some, yeah. So Jane and her team have been looking at some work around the sustainable environmental side in Cornwall and also on the Scillies. And I presume, Malcolm, this covers Scillies too? I know we're having conversations with it, but this document, yeah. Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I would just, firstly, just to support Mark, I think it's not just about the sustainable tourism, but it's about zero carbon and knowing the expertise that is at the Tremoe campus in terms of renewable energy. It would be madness not, I think, to somehow tie into that. What I was also going to say was that, sorry, let me just switch that on. What I was also going to say was that, the part of the sustainable tourism asked to me, I think, is about sustainable energy, sustainable agriculture and sustainable fishing. And we're making progress in all of those, probably most advanced in energy with the floating offshore wind opportunity and the onshore opportunities with geothermal. But also agriculture is moving reasonably quickly, and I'm very impressed with the work the Bannerman are doing. And the idea, I think somehow we're going to need to work out on the branding issue whether there's a kite mark approach to zero carbon. It's something that we thought about 18 months ago, Carol and I. And I think there's something in this, because actually it's all ultimately about decarbonisation, and that's the fundamental thing. Again, if we're sourcing locally as well, again, that's going to lower the carbon footprints. It's absolutely bound to, because we just don't have to have such a long supply chain. Completely support as well Emmy's points about creative, because part of the sustainable tourism offer is sustainable creative industries to support that industry. So I think I can see a completely circular thing here, and I think that what we've probably got to do is to think a little bit more, and I say we, I mean we, the energy sector, about how we start to get the numbers right, because I'm afraid to say that we don't know the numbers, and it's going to be some time before we really do. We don't even know the numbers for the key sectors of power, heat and energy in terms of carbon supply chains. So there's a bit of work to do this, but I think if we can do this in a circular way, I can assure you that once we get going on it, and we probably will start in the summer, we'll make sure that we include the tourism sector in that.
Thank you, Steve. I am having It's such a rich debate and such a rich presentation. I moved on a little bit against time. The only question I've got from me, but I'm still not sure I can see, is in the strategy, from communication, how do we tell this story to our customers to sort of describe to it? I'm just not sure quite that. This might be me, Malcolm, but I think the how do we get this message out in today's world might be a little bit different. So that just might be me. So I'll just log it. Any other questions? Go ahead, sorry, Malcolm.
I was going to say, no, that's very important. I love the quote. I think it's Eisenhower, that all plans are rubbish, but planning is essential. And what he meant by the process you go through. So we're on stage 2, starting with all the groups that will add greatly to this, and thanks for, you know, with all the sectors that are now getting into a group, and then that will be broadened out. One of the things we do think of, and I want to talk to Nathan about, is also towards the end of this process, when we have a vision of where we go, one stuff I didn't pick up is the probably invest £1 billion over the next decade. And we need to get it to the industry, but we also need to get some of this out to communities. So part of the process might be even put back to the autumn, because we're up against opening up, would be almost town meetings or area meetings, probably facilitated by somebody like Lawrence Reed, to have a wider debate, you know, picking up on the direction of travel. Because the one thing I've learned over 25 years is you could write the most perfect way of creating this, and people are too busy to do it. So I think the communication wider within partners is on track now. I think there is one wider in the wider community of Cornwall, and the business community and general community is one that is probably now a bit for the autumn, because we'll be going flying off on the 12th of April. But we do need to get people to, you know, hopefully to understand, but also support the direction of travel, because people will do it. When I wrote one years ago, and Will Ashworth was that, it was the whole thing that the beach could be a bit more of a year-round product. And what Will Ashworth did, and there has gone from sort of 18 staff full time to, in a normal year, over 200 at Watergate, and the beach is a venue which now happens everywhere. So, you know, the private sector will push it if they get it, but we do have to lead that to a certain degree, but also engage with people understanding the direction of travel and the opportunities. And then lots of people will spin off and do things, and almost it gets a life of its own.
Yeah, and we're seeing a little bit of that as well in terms of the environmental regenerative activities now. And I'm going to finish it now, and not because it's such. My old boss, by the way, Malcolm, said you get bored of a message before anybody ever hears it, which is sort of, I think, is also relevant to this conversation. So we just need to sort of formally say, I think what the team are asking us to do is to note the strategic direction of the tourism strategy under development and consider feedback for inclusion, which I think there's lots of rich feedback, and I think we'll be queuing up at the university, and to sort of delegate LEP endorsement to the final strategy to the LEP chair, chief exec, which might be the new chair, chief exec, and chair of the LEP rural subgroup. But I suspect as well we will want to bring the final version of this back once we've seen what happens over the next 6 months or so for good or bad. So I'd add an action that will bring this back to whenever the right time is, just to note how it's evolved. So if people are happy with those, if they could just do the hand thing, that would be really good. Okay. And have we got all the enough hands?
Yep, I can confirm that the recommendations have been carried.
Right, okay, and we'll add that note that we'll bring it back. That's perfect. Lovely, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I know we're running a little bit behind. So, Steve, Nathan, if I could pass on to the Enterprise Zone board. I know there'll be parts of this conversation maybe a little bit sensitive publicly, so there might be some stuff we need to just comment on in the private section afterwards, because it's, you know, embroiled in many things. So I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to pick this up, Nathan. I just thought I'd be quick. People have got the papers, and I'm conscious of time. I'll look at the operational sort of level of what's actually going on and then have a bit more of a strategic think. So in taking the aerospace, Goonhilly, no problems with Goonhilly, it's all working very well, and I think we're seeing the investments are working well. AeroHub, good office utilisation, and we're also starting to see interest, I think, in more space. So Mark and I were recently on a call with Abyss, who are a interesting company, interested in what we're trying to do there, and there are other companies interested in using the space there as well. I think we're going to see the possibility of fabrication there as well, as given the space there, and given the possibility of using marine offshore energy to actually provide green fabrication. So and lithium, of course, is the other part of that. Turning to marine offshore. I can't say too much about Hale, other than to say that I would hope that by the next time we meet, we'll be talking about a project developer actually operating or in position to be able to actually start to use the offshore site, not immediately, but perhaps with the build out of floating offshore wind in 2023. We're also, what I can say is that the Wave Hub Development Services has, thank you Mark, been awarded a contract with University of Exeter and University of Plymouth and the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult for £6 million for a Cornwall floating offshore wind accelerator bid. That contract signed. That allows us to start to develop some of the tools to accelerate the sector. So that's official. Tolvaden, we're starting to see interest in it. I suspect that will grow as the industry arrives. And in Falmouth, the AMP are actually doing reasonably good preparations. They're clearing the sites again in anticipation of the industry arrive. Haven't really used their enterprise zone in the way we anticipate, but I don't think that's a problem. Just wanted to stand back a little bit then and look a little bit more strategically and just say I think that what we will see in terms of the key sectors, I think in terms of where we've still got movement, it's AeroHub, Falmouth and Tolvaden. I think what we'll see in the AeroHub is mixed use on that site, so it will be space, but I'd be very surprised if we don't see other facilities there using the space there and the communications and the land areas there. And it wouldn't be surprised me if we see renewable energy fabrication, renewable energy supply chain matters there, and possibly other types of low carbon fabrication there. Turning to Falmouth, I think it's going to be floating offshore wind is going to be the big thing. The three things I think we might see there is, firstly, we may see fabrication of some of the floating offshore wind floaters. We may see cables there. We may almost certainly will see assembly of these large floating turbines as it all arrives. And then I imagine that will be one of the central bases for operations and maintenance. What's interesting is the Crown Estate, who own the offshore sea and seafloor, have recently announced a very big Celtic Sea focused discussion on floating offshore wind with larger projects at 300 megawatts. That's a big deal. A 300 megawatt project is probably about the best part of £1 billion worth of inward investment, and our target is 3 gigawatts by 2030, so you can quickly do the maths. It's really woken the industry up, and I think we really will see as a result, I'm bound to say, of the LEP's engagement, we really will see great interest now in the sector, because it looks like we're starting to establish our position as possibly one of the world leaders of floating offshore wind. Tolvaden, I think, will benefit as well, less likely to have some of these issues in it, but it'll be very much supply chain. So I'd imagine that we could see warehousing there and we could see fabrication there. So all in all, I would say that we've had a pretty good year in terms of what's going on operationally, but we're extremely well positioned in terms of what I think will happen strategically over the next 18 months or so. But I'd focus on three things and just say that it will be good, I think, probably under AOB matters privately marked, to talk about green ports and where we're seeing that. I'll also be interested to see where the government goes in terms of zones, because I'm slightly concerned we may see zone proliferation with enterprise zones, energy zones, university zones and so on. So I'm very keen that if we do something, or if the government does want to do more, that we actually make sure the roads are all coordinated as opposed to overlapping with different functions. And I'm just going to say one last thing, which is not really enterprise zone matter related, but we'll be reaching out to the international oil companies, because we see them as investors in the floating offshore wind sector. And I'm just keen that people understand that actually they're not part of the problem, but also part of the solution. Because right now we can't do renewable energy transition without them, because diesel is critical to the supply chain. It's not very well understood by government, but I just want people to understand that because diesel is critical to all parts of almost every part of the supply chain in solar, wind, and almost every other offshore renewable part. It's not going to, we're not going to make this transition. We will, eventually sort of come off that. But the international companies, not the enemy, they're actually part of the solution. I think it's important to understand that because it's one of the reasons that we're reaching out to them. Well, no doubt we're best for us to discuss green ports under section 2.
Yeah, there's a couple of things which we'll put into private. Yeah, I know it's not, and this is an enterprise on board. There's also a very welcome clean marine fund, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think it's £20 million fund. So we're sort of thinking about how we that could be helpful, particularly for the transition for fishing. So we're having a look at whether we've got the resources, whether we can align to that. But that was a welcome announcement by government.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had a good conversation.
Especially. Sorry, to be rude, cut you off. Glenn's going to come on board in a minute. Is there any other business, any other comments on that, sorry, or any other business for this section? And if not, what we'll do, we'll just take a couple of minute break for Emma to sort out all the switching off of systems and things, and then we'll come back to a private session. There's a few things for the private session which we'll pick up when we do. So lovely, I think we're done. So Emma, if you could do all your magic, and if we could maybe just be away for just literally 2 or 3 minutes because we're running a bit behind now. I'll give Glenn a quick call and we'll pick up on the private session in a couple of minutes. So thank you, Emma.
Okay, thank you. I'll confirm once the live stream has stopped.